Welcome to the Art and of Examination course, which is offered as part of the medical training for UT Southwestern medical students and is sponsored by the Dallas Museum of Art and the University of Texas at Dallas. What's exciting and unique about this course is that it is a collaboration between physicians, Dr. Heather Wickless, myself, an art historian at the university, and Amanda Blake, who works with us at the Dallas Museum of Art. It is a careful selection of works of art that come together to help the medical students to see more closely and to explain to them and give them practice in close observation, which they can then use in their clinical skills later on in their career.
This class is designed to teach students how to improve their visual diagnostic skills, to improve their attention to fine details, for them to also understand different viewpoints when looking at the same subject matter, and to improve their skills of compassion, not only with others, but with themselves as well.
Course goals: learn to observe, describe, analyze, and communicate about works of art. Use these skills to improve the way that you will examine and care for patients. Understand the importance of empathy and compassion in caring for your patients and yourself. Learning objectives: make detailed observations of artworks and clinical images. Build your communication skills by speaking and writing about your observations. Understand how judgment in evaluating art and your own personal biases affect patient care. Show how empathic communication can improve your care of patients and yourself. Increase your own engagement with the arts at the Dallas Museum of Art and other institutions. We have chosen the Gothic bed from the American collection as a representative of an image that is common in all of our lives. It is a place to sleep, a place to rest, a place to heal, and it's a place to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. This Gothic bed was made by Crawford Riddell in 1844 and intended for an historic place. We chose this bed for the class teaching about sympathy, empathy, and compassion because you as a doctor will learn how to understand the roles of suffering in new ways as people do at home in their beds and as they do in the hospital, and also the healing process, which is wonderfully told through the stories that you can remember in your own life. Learning objectives: learn the differences between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Learn to observe and analyze works of art and apply those skills to patient diagnoses. Demonstrate your skills at close observation through accurate and detailed descriptions of 3 types of beds: a Gothic bed in the museum, your personal bed, and a hospital bed. Show how you would use empathy in communicating with a sick and recovering patient. Today's class is focusing on 3 very important concepts that you will experience in your medical practice: sympathy, empathy, and compassion. When you see a mother or father holding a child that's in pain or suffering, and you look at their face, you see true compassion. That parent wants to do something for that child, from the core of their body, and they're doing everything that they can. And that is what compassion is about. It is that transformative act of trying to help the healing of others. And it is one of the tenets, of course, of the Buddhist teaching and practices. Sympathy is something we all feel. When we see someone who has been hurt or has had something bad happen to them, and we can understand that how they feel. And you'll often say, I'm so sorry that, that this happened or that you feel that way. Empathy is a deeper understanding of that. It's actually literally taking yourself and putting yourself in the other person's shoes. It's a deep understanding of the experience of loss or disease or suffering. But the reality is that it's an important part for you as doctors, because if you become truly too empathetic, you burn out. You know, that is something that the medical practice is trying to learn, this fine balance in your lives. And so we're going to talk about meditation. And of course, you've all been in this class where we look at beautiful things. And that is, you know, it's trying to create a world around you that supports you in your clinical practice. This is famously referred to as the Gothic bed. What do you see looking at this? Obviously, it's a bed, but is there anything special about this bed?
Extremely tall.
Extremely tall, right.
Its roof is really pretty.
Pardon?
Its roof is really pretty.
Yeah, the roof, the canopy up there. You mean you're referring to that? That's a canopy. And the wood actually is rosewood, which is extremely rare and comes from Brazil. So this bed was very significant in the time it was made. Every work of art in the museum has an acquisitions folder. The object is coming into the collection. We have to research it. We just can't, you know, just because you thought it was a good idea to give it to us, we can't just take it. We have to make sure it's in good condition. We have to check what's called the provenance and background. We have to know a lot about the work of art. And if it needs conservation, which the bed did, we have to prepare and do that.
The record of the bed and the history of the bed tie in very directly to a patient record, and how a patient who may be sort of broken down and things are sort of falling apart with that person, how we as physicians and as nurses and healthcare providers go about the process of sort of deconstructing what's wrong with that individual, diagnosing what's wrong with that individual, and then making a stepwise fashion to sort of like help rebuild and make that person whole again. And I think that the medical record captures that, and it directly translates with the bed history and the record of the bed.
Where do you think a bed like this would belong? In a palace, but we're in America. What's our equivalent of a palace? Plantation, or what else? Mansion, or what? The White House. In fact, this bed was made for the White House. And it was before Lincoln was elected. So it was made for Henry Clay, who was running for president. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you feel about these things, he didn't succeed. And his supporters, they commissioned this entire suite of furniture from Riddell in Philadelphia, one of the greatest furniture makers. And then, if you can imagine, he lost the election. Oh. So they had this enormous, bulky set of furniture on their hands. And what do you think they did? Well, yeah, that basically you didn't have big auctions like that. They turned to each other and said, who wants this? And one of his friends, Turnbull, who had a plantation, you mentioned that, in Louisiana, the Rosedale plantation, took the entire suite of furniture. In there is the bill of sale, and it was about $2,500 at the time it was sold to come to Rosedale. I can tell you we did not pay $2,000 for this. And so a miracle happened, and the entire suite of furniture went to Rosedale, and there are photographs in it in the file. But what happened next is it got to Rosedale, and what do you think happened when the owner saw it?
The ceiling was not tall enough.
Correct. Correct. This is like almost 14 feet tall up here. And so even though they had a plantation house, it did not fit. So he had to do the obvious thing, which was build a room, right? And his wife said, we're not giving the furniture back, we're building a room. So an entire room was built and in Louisiana, added on to the plantation. And this entire suite of furniture lived there throughout Turnbull's life and for many generations of the owners of Rosedale Plantation. And there was only one problem. They have, of course, it's Louisiana, no air conditioning, and so when it was hot, what do? They just open the windows. In comes the wind and the dust and the mold. And so over the 100+ years that it was in Rosedale, it fell into very bad condition. It did not, I assure you, look like this when it came. So when it arrived at the museum, we had to figure out what kind of restoration we would do for it. And in the case of this bed, we went to a very famous furniture restorer north of us, and he took apart the entire bed into literally hundreds and hundreds of pieces. And each piece of this rosewood was then hand sanded down, and 11 layers of whatever it's called, shellac were added to it. So as doctors, I mean, it's kind of, I hate to say this, kind of a dermatology. What would you say, when you're rebuilding your skin surface? Resurfacing. This was a major resurfacing activity. So what happened after this was that the entire bed was reassembled and brought to the museum.
Art conservation and conservation of objects, the idea is that we do something, or the conservationists do something to that object, but to the viewer at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, the viewer can't tell that anything had happened to that piece. Everything looks whole, everything looks pristine and intact and as it was previously. And so in medicine, that's always our goal in healthcare, is that, I'm a dermatologist, so if I do something to a patient's skin, for instance, I want to make it look as if I leave no footprints behind, that no one can tell that I really did anything to that person's skin, but it looks better, it looks restored. And I think the same is true in any other specialty, orthopedic surgery. People get their hips replaced. They should feel and act and function just like the native hip might have. So we're often kind of reconstructing humans in medicine, just like the bed and other artworks might get reconstructed. And the idea is that they're reconstructed to be whole and to be functional, so that the average viewer wouldn't be able to tell that anything was ever wrong to begin with.
In the class of Art of Observation, that's something that we noticed very similarly, when various students will look at the same piece of art, and some of them would look at it as maybe a sad emotion versus a happy emotion, but it was the same piece of art that we were seeing. And that happens in the real world. So I think it's important to realize and understand that what you see is your own perspective, and it's important to get the perspectives of others to get a full picture.
What does bedness mean to you? I mean, it's where people, and especially in this case, made love, and they died, and children were born. A bed is not just an inanimate object. It is a place of being in one's life. And so we look at this so abstracted today, and with this pristine red cover, it is much more than that. And when you go in, I just finished 10 days in the hospital with double pneumonia, and I can tell you there is no bed in the hospital that has this level of compassion and memory. People don't do the things that I just mentioned. When you're in the hospital, you're just trying to feel better. And so bedness there, when I came out one time and I came up here to teach, I said, oh my God, I never thought of the bed and its human spirit. And so think of that when you're dealing with your patients. It is much more than just being inanimate or alone. You really have to think about how important it is to be with that bed.
And when you think about the beds that patients are in a hospital setting, they're almost cage-like, because they are designed for, not really, somewhat patient comfort, but more for patient safety. So, they've got these bars on the sides that flip up, and they can prohibit the patient from sort of easily getting in and out of the bed. And there's, kind of all these buttons and controls. It can be really confusing, and a lot of times the beds have alarms on them. So if you move a certain way or you do certain things, the bed will beep at you. And so I think for the students to think about what beds are for patients versus what beds are to ourselves and the comforts that they bring is an important exercise for them to think about.
Understanding the role of sympathy, empathy, and compassion by doctors is critical to being successful in their treatment of patients. And the bed is just a marker or a figurehead in this conversation to help remind you of this important role that you have personally in caring for your patients. We're moving now from the wonderful Gothic bed in the American galleries to a very different piece in the museum's collection. It's from Africa, and the standing male figure is called an Nkisi Nkondi. It holds a paquet of medicinal and magical powers, and his role in the community was to provide protection. We're going to think about that in terms of the role of being a doctor and how that can relate to your practice. Learning objectives. Explain how a power figure helps us to understand compassion. Learn to observe and analyze works of art and apply those skills to patient diagnoses. Demonstrate your skill at visual analysis by describing in detail the Nkisi Nkondi and mimicking his pose with your own body. State your connection to the artwork as a future physician caring for your community. We started the class by passing out x-rays of the Nkisi Nkondi, one of his beard and one of the paquet, or the large belly button. When the work came into the collection of the museum, part of the conservation treatments required us to take these photographs or x-rays so that we could understand the structure and the insides of what we were dealing with before conservation on the work was done.
The x-ray sort of shows what's going on inside of the Nkisi and informs us about sort of what's beneath the surface in that object. Just like in medicine, when, there's only so much you can see by just looking at the surface, and sometimes we need to use imaging to see what's beneath.
When you look at the actual beard, you notice what about the beard? It is a different material, and it had to be of a different type so that you could actually put the nails into it and attach it to the jaw. And then this is where do you think this is from? The last one is what I'm showing them.
Belly area, chest, in the front.
Right. Abdomen, belly. It's really the belly button. Don't worry, you are absolutely correct. But this is what the belly button looks like. Only when you look at that belly button, is it a real belly button? No, what is it? What do you see?
It's like a sphere.
It's a sphere, right, that protrudes from the belly. And what else is in there?
A shell.
A shell, right. Does anybody know what kind of shell it is? It's actually called a cowrie shell, but normally cowrie shells are very small. This is a huge cowrie shell, so it's set in there. And what's unusual about the cowrie shell? How does it relate to a belly button? How does this shell relate to a human belly button?
It opens into like a hole.
Yeah, Right, the whole. So in this case, spirit or medicinal purposes can go in and out. And the paquette is what it's called, is all filled with medicine, and it is filled in a way that it has healing powers inside of it. So the Inkisi is actually, does he look friendly or not?
I would not say.
I would not. I think, I think that's a fair assumption. He is not your friendliest guy. What else do you notice about him?
Looks either scared or in pain.
Okay. If you had hundreds of nails in you would think, think about those things too. Well, what do you think he does in his community? Why would somebody pound nails into him?
Maybe to
Great. Who said marker? Marker of what, Mohammed?
Just like some like sort of marking like an event in time
Yes.
in some way.
Right. Any other ideas? That is a really good idea.
maybe to
Come on. Ivy?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Ivy. Well, I looked at this piece earlier,
Oh, good.
and I remember it was about making like an agreement
Yes.
with like a fellow villager,
Right.
and like marking like your promise.
Marking the agreement for the whole community. So his healing powers are not just like the bed for an individual or small family. His healing powers are for the whole community. He's supposed to bring peace. What you and I, may I use you as an example? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you and I have a disagreement, it could be about land or people, women, you're a handsome man, or it could be about, healing, one of our, healing somebody in the community. Once we come to an agreement, what do we do in the United States? We shake hands. That's the easy one. Another solution is if we have a tougher agreement, what do? We sign something or go to court, and those become resolutions. So each one of those nails in there is like an agreement that the community has to come together to witness, and then it stays in the community. What do you think happens if a nail falls out? Good news, bad news? Put it back in is right. Right, get that IV back in there. Don't let it fall out. Yeah, no, it's not good news if it falls out, unless maybe the dispute is over. That's another way. If we had had a land disagreement, our families might have gotten married and then there's no more problem. But in general, they try to resolve it again. To truly understand the Nkisi and Kandi, we're going to change into him. We're actually going to transform ourselves into this figure. So what I want you to do is everybody change positions just a little bit, because you guys haven't seen the front of him. I want you to go here, and some of you have actually enjoyed him. Come over here and put everything down, because you're going to get in the shape of the Nkisi and Kandi. Someone whose responsibility is to be a major force in the community and resolving those conflicts. So we're going to start at the head, top of the head, and I want you to lift your head. It's not straight out. What is the head? Slightly tilted up, okay? You tilt your head up just a little bit. And then what's the next big feature? The eyes. Open your eyes as wide as you possibly can. Not just a little bit, as wide as you can. All right, come down. Head up, eyes wide, mouth open just slightly. That's your breath. Okay, shoulders round forward, not straight back, round forward, and hands on hips. Cinch those hips in like a cheerleader, right? Head up, eyes open, mouth apart. Now you're going to look down and look at his hips, how important they are. And then go down to the knees. If you look at this, you'll find out that the knees are not going forward, they're actually going backwards, like horses' knees. So that's very difficult. We don't expect you to do this. And then plant your feet. Stand at your feet. Separate them just a little bit. So starting at the bottom, solid feet, bent knees, cinched waists, rolled shoulders, head up, eyes open. And we're going to hold this for 5 seconds. And what do you feel?
uncomfortable.
But do you feel anything? I get that it's uncomfortable, but what else do you feel?
My eyes hurt.
Your eyes hurt? Okay, but what else is happening physically to your body?
It's tense.
Is it just tension or?
I feel like maybe you're like contracting your core.
Yeah,
It's strenuous.
it's strenuous. His job is strenuous. His job is strenuous. So it's taking on physically the manifestations of his entire community. And guess what? He stays like this always. You can see how this power, what's called a power figure, really becomes that manifestation. So it's compassion in a different way, not so benign, but full of energy, full of excitement, because he represents a living community.
The relationship of the Nkisi and what medical students can learn from the Nkisi is that the Nkisi is something that communities go to when they're seeking a resolution or a solution to a problem. And just like the Nkisi, physicians represent a source of solution to a problem and can represent somewhat of an authority or a power figure.
As physicians, we're flooded with a ton of information, going from just looking at the patient, talking to the patient and family, but also there's laboratory tests, there's imaging tests, and like you said, there's also information from the medical record that you have to synthesize and really just kind of filter the most important parts out of it.
We've been looking at the Nkisi and Kandi for the last class, and what's exciting to understand is how the students shared the experience of getting into the pose of the standing male figure, of thinking about those issues of caring for an entire community and standing for that community in the way that you can embrace them and you can help an entire community, which is the key role of being a doctor in service. There are remarkable relationships between the great Gothic bed that we saw in the American galleries, the Nkisi and Kandi in the African galleries, and the Buddha that we're going to be studying now. All of these three have symbols of power and protection as a part of them. And the mudra of this Buddha Sakyamuni is the image of power and protection. And we're going to be talking about compassion and that role in your life and in the lives of others that you care for. Learning objectives. Articulate the differences between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Learn to observe and analyze works of art and apply those skills to patient diagnoses. Demonstrate your skills in visual analysis through accurate and detailed descriptions of the Sakyamuni Buddha. Describe how patients are affected by the physician's body language, dress, and verbal interaction. This is the Buddha Sakyamuni. He was first and foremost a prince. He had great wealth. He wore jewels. He was married to the most beautiful woman in the land. And he lived in a palace completely surrounded and protected. His father did not want him to see beyond the walls, because beyond the walls was what? Beyond the walls was suffering. And he snuck out one time. For the very first time that he snuck out, he saw death. He saw people that were old and suffering. He saw disease. He saw people that were hungry, and he had never seen these experiences of life before because his life was so protected. And it profoundly changed him, and it created a great sense of him wanting to do something. And he left the palace, he left his wife, he left all the jewels, and he went out to begin the teachings of the Buddha. And throughout his lifetimes, he never turned back. He is not a god. He taught a practice of a way of living and thinking that was based on compassion. Buddha said that compassion is in your heart, and it's the ability to feel suffering. He's the one who helps us in his teachings to really understand that suffering is a part of life, and the important thing to do is to learn how to deal with it, to not be afraid of it, to embrace it. So his teachings were very important, and it's unusual, to be truly honest, to have a Buddha like this, where you see him in his princely robes. And this, normally you see the Buddha in a lotus position or with a standing position. Well, what's remarkable about this is, do you know what mudras are? In many, certainly in the Buddhist tradition, and to some degree in the Hindu tradition, hand gestures, and it's also in the Christian traditions, the gesture of your hand has meaning. It helps to tell the story. And so in Buddhism, they are called mudras. So there are some like this, there are some with a hand down, touching the earth, and then raising his other hand in teaching. This one is two with your hands like this. And so what do you think he's saying with your hands like this? In a minute, you're all going to get up and do this with me.
Calm.
Stop or calm. Okay, other ideas. More ideas. More of you. Pardon? Be at peace, right. It's another way to look at it.
It can also be a way like, I want to connect with you.
Yes, it's a symbol of protection. You know, I'm going to protect you. I'm not going to harm you. I'm not going to stab you. I'm protecting you. You can see my hands are free. So with this, I want you to, Amanda's going to play a chant while we all start up, and then she'll play it again, and we're going to meditate for a few minutes. So I want you to all get free of your chairs, stand up with nothing in your hands, and walk around the Buddha, because you're going to get, you saw this, you're going to get in the Buddha's position. So observe details that you can call out to me.
Like the Buddha, as physicians, the way that we dress and carry ourselves is equally important. And there is a lot that patients may glean about us as individuals and as their physician without any verbal communication, just through the way we carry ourselves and the way that we're dressed. And I think that makes it especially important for the students in this class to understand why we ask them to wear their white coat, why we ask them to wear professional clothing, and the importance of our dress and our composure, because that can have a direct relationship with how we relate with patients and how patients perceive us as their physicians.
How is he standing? Where is his head?
Straight.
Yeah, straight, looking straight at you. But his eyes looking straight at you? Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to get in the form, and I want several of you, I'm not going to do it, to call out where you want to begin. Let's begin. We'll begin at the head. All right, so somebody call out who's looking at him, how we should form our body.
Straight back and chin parallel to the floor.
Okay, straight backs, shoulders straight. And the feet, are they as far apart as the Ankisi, or are they closer together?
Close together, but not.
And what does that do to your balance?
It's not as good.
That's right, it's not as stable. Okay, come up through the body, through the feet, up to your butt. Now next are your hands. Put your hands out. How many of you have fingers as long as those? You do. Several of you do. And do you notice anything about those fingers? Are they all separated or are they touching? They're all touching, so be sure your fingers are touching. And your thumb is where? In front. Okay. Now, shoulders back, head up, straight. And where are your eyes? They're looking out, slightly down. And now we're just going to listen to the music. Hold your pose. They ran out of breath. But the whole idea is during chanting, you repeat a mantra over and over again, calling out the words of the Buddha and his teachings. And so they repeat and repeat, very much the way the Christian chants do and the Hindu chants do. They all are the same. And but in this case, these Tibetan monks have decided not to use music. There are lots of performances where they use a lot of music in them, but not they rattles and drums and bells and other things. But when they're formally chanting, no. Do you feel the energy of each other? It's really magical. Okay. So one of the things, because you're all going to become doctors, is this ability to heal and protect your patients is really what you emblem. And one of the reasons I asked you all, which you kindly indulged me with today, was wearing the white coats. Those are part of your symbols. And as you enter the room, you're dressed differently than everybody else who comes to the patient's room. And so the Buddha and other figures in the museum are dressed in a particular way to send that signal. And so your hands, your gestures, your ability to not just rush in and say to the patient, how are you today? Are you feeling better? That's all I want to know. Better is best. And instead of doing that, take 3 breaths, find your center, and walk in slowly to that room so that you can fully attend to the patient. It's one of many you'll see that day, but for those 5 or 10 minutes, that is the patient that you need to focus on, no one else. So I hope that you'll take this moment to just remember that and translate it in any way that you can into your life. But breathing is really an important part and skill for you to have as you move forward.
I think that the Buddha teaches the students how to take a moment to pause when they're going about their day-to-day work as a physician, to stop and pause when they may be feeling stressed out and their mind may be going a million miles at once, how to sort of get recentered and regrounded and focus on the task at hand. And I think being able to learn how to do that and how to access that, that's a tool that someone can tap into at any time. And that can go a long way for preventing a state of feeling like one is on a treadmill that just never ends, that you can sort of get regrounded and recentered. And that can really, I think, in the long run, help to do things like increase empathy and reduce burnout.
The Buddha Sakyamuni that we've just been looking at represents with his hands the mudra of protection and power. And that image is conveyed not only through his hands, but his entire physical being. It's important for the doctors to have shared the experience of a meditation practice, of looking deeply at the work of art, and thinking about how those attributes can help them in their practice of serving their patients. It takes that moment of slowing down, being present with a patient, and then taking action, which are the components of true compassion.
Trying to understand how other people view, especially other healthcare professionals, how they view art was also, I think, a very, very insightful thing I learned, in the sense that you, along with other future healthcare professionals and current healthcare professionals, are looking at the same painting or same sculpture, the same physical entity, but your perceptions can be completely different, but they are generally about the same thing.
There are two reasons we selected this painting by Jacques-Louis David, who was only 24 when he created the work of art. And it is a story about Niobe and the slaughter of her children by Diana and Apollo. The first reason we selected this painting has to do with the extraordinary use of the human form and its painting by this young artist, and the way that the human body helps to create the composition in the painting. The second reason we selected this work has so much to do with the story and the interaction between the figures themselves. And we will be doing exercises that help you to think about your reaction to this situation and what comprises the way in which you would talk to each other under these circumstances. Learning objectives. Analyze the composition of the painting and develop a story from the clues in this image. Describe what is going on in the scene. How is the composition created? If you were a doctor in the scene, identify whom you would treat first and why. Select one person in the painting. Explain what that person might be feeling, thinking, and experiencing. Describe how you would speak to a parent after the loss of a child. This is one of the best examples of a work of art that doctors should look at, because once you get to know the story and you begin to observe things, you'll see why. It's a fascinating piece. As we look at it, this is a story out of Ovid's Metamorphoses. And as one of those stories, you can see with a great deal of care that in the middle is the central figure of a woman holding up her hand to stop something. And actually it is the Queen Niobe, who is trying to protect her last child who is alive and is sheltered under her cloak. If you look below, you'll find in various disarray her 14 children, 13 other children in this case, who have already been shot. And you can see through the twisted forms, some of the figures over here are holding their wounds, others have their eyes slightly open, but others and are praying, whereas others are completely limp. The two gods up above, Diana and Apollo, were sent by their mother, Latona, to take vengeance on Niobe, who had too much pride. So this is that moment when the slaughter is underway, and you're seeing it sort of 3/4 of the way through.
Apollo and Diana painting is also really important. We incorporate it into a class where we're discussing a lot about empathy and compassion, and sort of in medicine, at some point in any physician's career, we're going to be talking with and counseling a parent whose child might have died, or a child whose parent might have died. And how do we talk with that individual? And that's one of the discussions that we also have around this painting, because it sort of illustrates in great detail the loss of this mother and the efforts that she's going through in order to try and save her children.
Do you remember from the Pierre behind you, the abduction of Europa? One of the things that I think is interesting about these two is that the central figures are both women and both in white dresses. But in the one over there, look at how flowing and beautiful her dress is. And the one over here does not have that same sort of breathy movement. Here, white is being used. They're both being used to center your eye, but the white and the women are telling different stories. It's like the Inkisi and the Buddha, Sakyamuni. In looking at works of art, there are these formal components of line, shape, and color that help to organize the painting in a way that makes the experience for the viewer more manageable, more pleasurable. What happens when you're a doctor is when you walk into your patient's room or into the ER, you need a way in which to focus on the multitude of things that are going on. And learning these skills about how to filter things out and how to look for the details of something can be very advantageous for you as a doctor. And so one of the questions ultimately would be, who do you take care of if you were a physician walking into the scene? Who would you take care of immediately to try to help them?
The guy with the neck wound?
The guy with at least his arm is up. That's a good. Who else?
The guy with the chest wound.
Yes, he's at least motionless. Has motion in it. He's trying to stop the bleeding. Who's absolutely gone? The stack of figures right here. Understanding composition is a way to help you as doctors focus on a huge amount of input, ideas, and information that is coming into you, and then filter out to find a way to bring clarity to your thinking.
In viewing the Niobe painting, we wanted the students to be able to sort of reflect on what it might be like to be a mother who had lost her child, and then to think about, then re-step into their role as a physician and think about what words one might want to say to express sympathy to the mother who has just lost her child. And so the students were then sort of able to reflect upon what's a good way to show empathy and what's maybe not a good way to show empathy. And then themselves were instructed to sit down and write maybe a sentence or two of what they would say to a mother who might have lost a child. And then they were to work in a team to assemble these into short poems. But it's really an opportunity for the students to reflect, because at some point, all physicians are faced with consoling and reflecting upon how do we do that appropriately and how do we do that not appropriately. We're best prepared when we've already gone through the mental exercise of how we might approach a situation, and this is an opportunity for them to do that.
As a doctor, you can approach a patient who will be very different from who you are. And if you have things that you can relate with them, whether that's art they're really excited about, or whether they're excited about music or some other form outside of what the condition they're experiencing, you can connect with them on a more personal level.
The painting by Jacques-Louis David of the death of the children of Niobe is a powerful example to learn about the experience of death, the impact of the loss, and how you will need to respond as doctors with sympathy, empathy, and compassion.